When Princess Anne stepped into the sealed archives beneath Clarence House, no one expected her quiet descent into the vault to trigger a royal quake. But within minutes, palace staff were seen rushing toward her chamber, faces pale, eyes wide. Something ancient, buried, and utterly explosive had been found, and it would change everything for Zara Tindall. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began as a routine request. Anne, ever dutiful, had been summoned to inspect and catalogue personal artifacts left behind by the Queen Mother. The storage area, cloaked beneath the creaking floors of Clarence House, had not been entered since 2002. Many believed it to house only ceremonial clutter, worn coronets, aged documents, sentimental fragments of an era long past. But Anne, seasoned by years of royal discretion, sensed there was more buried in the dust. As she walked further into the dimly lit chamber, her eyes caught sight of a peculiar iron coffer tucked beneath layers of cloth and forgotten memories. Velvet-bound and unmistakably out of place, it bore no record in the royal inventory. It was as though it had been hidden deliberately, concealed from prying eyes and cataloguers alike. Without waiting for approval, Anne ordered it opened. The hinges creaked with age as the lid lifted, revealing a meticulous arrangement of handwritten letters, royal bonds, and antique ledgers, each etched in the Queen Mother's elegant script. But nestled among the formalities was something far more unsettling. A heavy envelope sealed in red wax and marked with chilling precision, to be opened by my daughter alone. The air thickened. Staff gasped audibly. One assistant backed away as though the envelope might explode. In the stunned silence that followed, Anne stared at the message in disbelief. A tide of emotion swept across her face. Confusion, curiosity, then a flicker of dread. She clutched the envelope instinctively, drawing it to her chest as though to protect its contents from the very air. What secrets lay within the Queen Mother's final words? Why was it never disclosed? And why had it been hidden so carefully, far from official eyes, far from any family oversight? The palace was unprepared for what was coming, and for Zara, whose life, until now, had been defined by distance from the monarchy's inner turmoil, the vault's revelation would not be a mere inheritance. It would be a summons, a catalyst, the ignition of a legacy she never asked for, and perhaps never wanted. But the envelope wasn't the only surprise waiting underground. What it contained would shatter generations of expectation and thrust Zara Tindall into a world of dangerous legacy and whispered envy. Inside a letter untouched for over 2 decades lay the Queen Mother's most personal confession and her most scandalous bequest. With trembling hands, Anne unfolded the pages, only to find a decision so shocking, so deliberate. It threatened to rupture royal bonds and ignite fresh rivalry. The parchment trembled between Anne's fingers, its creases still crisp, as if the past had been preserved in wait for this precise moment. The Queen Mother's handwriting flowed in flourished strokes, elegant, regal, but laced with undertones of sorrow and apprehension. Each line seemed to bleed a private truth, a message buried beneath layers of family tradition and royal choreography. From the very beginning, the Queen Mother's voice rang with clarity. If this is read, then the House of Windsor has reached the threshold I feared. She made no attempt to soften the blow. She warned, I do not trust the machinery around me to respect my truest intentions, and so I have hidden them not from cruelty, but from necessity. Then came the confession that stopped Anne cold. The Queen Mother had quietly amassed a fortune, vast, personal, and entirely separate from the Crown estate, a fortune constructed over decades through private investments, wartime holdings, and discreet inheritances that never made the ledgers at Buckingham. And she had not left it to Charles, nor to any institution, nor to Anne herself. The entire estate, an estimated sum in the tens of millions, was to go solely, exclusively, and without division to Zara Tindall. Anne's breath caught. A wave of maternal instinct surged through her fierce pride entangled with dread. Her daughter, long considered the normal royal, the untitled Olympian, the woman who never chased grandeur, had been chosen as the sole guardian of a legacy designed to stay hidden. The Queen Mother's reasoning was both poetic and provocative. She wrote of Zara's unburdened path, praising her for never seeking spotlight nor succumbing to the palace's game of masks. She called her the one who walks freely and watches wisely, a granddaughter whose soul could not be bought nor manipulated, and perhaps most powerfully, she labelled her the only one untouched by courtly rot. But behind every noble word lay Anne's torment. How would the family take this? How would Charles react when he discovered he'd been bypassed in both blood and trust? What would Camilla do, knowing Zara now held influence that no crown could decree? Anne folded the letter slowly, her heartbeat drumming louder with every second. She had always shielded Zara from the palace's poisonous inner world. Now, the Queen Mother had placed her daughter at the very center of it. But the fortune's secrecy hadn't protected it from danger because someone, somewhere in the palace, had long suspected it and had been hunting for it. The moment word slipped through the palace corridors, the reaction was electric and lethal. Camilla's private drawing room was reportedly overturned, aides silenced. Zara, caught completely unaware, suddenly found herself at the eye of a storm, and Camilla was far from done. The call came in the early hours, Anne's voice, low but urgent. "You need to come to Clarence House now." Zara, having no inkling of what lay ahead, obeyed without hesitation. But while she was en route, the Queen Consort was being briefed through unofficial channels. At first, there was disbelief. Camilla, so tightly wound in the apparatus of control, could not fathom that such a decision had been made behind her back. Then came the rage. Items were swept from her table. Her aides fell into silence. The question that burst through the palace walls like a thunderclap was simple. Why Zara? The Queen Mother's will, though private, had sent tremors through the highest echelons of power, and Camilla was not about to accept being outmaneuvered by a granddaughter she considered peripheral. The confrontation with King Charles was swift and brutal. Behind closed doors, Camilla demanded answers. Why had he not known? Why had Anne been allowed to open a sealed letter, unannounced, unchallenged, unsupervised? Charles, caught off guard, struggled to maintain composure. He insisted he had no knowledge of the inheritance, that the Queen Mother's personal wealth had always been shrouded in secrecy, that only deepened Camilla's fury. She interpreted it as betrayal by the monarchy, by her husband, and by a family that had once fought to secure her place in its ranks. Soon after, whispers turned to daggers. The rift between Anne and Camilla widened, turning icy and brittle. Their once formal civility shattered under the weight of accusation and insinuation. Anne, fierce in her silence, refused to apologize for her mother's wishes. Camilla, relentless, began rallying quiet support from her network within the palace. Rumors took flight. Was the letter real? Was Zara manipulated? Could Anne have fabricated its contents? Though no one dared speak openly, the innuendo circulated in measured tones, infecting trust like a slow poison. And in the center of it all was Zara, blindsided. When Anne finally revealed the truth, Zara recoiled not out of greed, but disbelief. "I never asked for this," she said quietly, unable to reconcile the enormity of what had been thrust upon her. She had built a life away from this, free from the palace's suffocating politics, away from the scrutiny. And yet, now, she was being dragged into a whirlwind, not of her making. But destiny, once unleashed, doesn't wait for permission. It moves without mercy, and its weight cannot be dodged. Even as public silence masked the royal chaos, private corridors echoed with demands, alliances, and betrayal. And one name kept resurfacing: Margaret. Hidden in the shadows of history was a prophecy long ignored. A letter penned by Princess Margaret years before her death would now come screaming into the present, warning of a buried decision that would favor the granddaughter most like me. Anne, desperate to understand the magnitude of her mother's decision and the storm it had unleashed, began scouring through decades of personal correspondence. Somewhere in the blur of royal protocols and family legacies, she sought answers not just for Zara, but for herself. In a private drawer tucked within her late sister's writing bureau, she found it. An unladled journal bound in cracked green leather. Margaret's handwriting danced across the pages in her usual bold, unforgiving style, part poet, part warrior. As Anne flipped through its contents, one entry brought her breath to a halt. Dated just months before Margaret's death, The entry didn't just reference Zara, it warned of her fate. "Mother sees something in her," Margaret had written, "something she never saw in us. Perhaps it's her peace, her refusal to grovel, or perhaps it's the fire she doesn't even know she carries." It wasn't just admiration, it was prediction. Margaret had called it years in advance. "One day the silent rider will inherit more than titles," she wrote, a chilling metaphor for Zara's unpretentious public life, where horses and family came before hierarchy and ambition. Margaret had been watching. She noted the way their mother lit up when Zara entered a room, the pride veiled in discipline, the affection disguised as detachment. Margaret had seen it all and knew what it meant. But she also saw the danger. In another passage, darker in tone, she confided her fears. "If Camilla rises unchecked," she warned, "the crown's claws will reach for Zara. Anne must see it. She must shield her." It wasn't a note, it was a plea, one sister to another, a call to vigilance. Margaret and the Queen Mother had always shared a clandestine bond, built not on obedience but on resistance. They were royal women who had endured the institution's constraints, yet found quiet ways to rebel. Now, it was clear they had orchestrated a plan long before the public ever noticed Zara's rise, a silent rebellion, a hidden inheritance, a legacy bound not by diamonds, but by defiance. Anne sat with the journal in her lap, feeling the layers peel away. Her mother's choice hadn't been impulsive. It had been years in the making, perhaps even decades, and Margaret had been the secret witness to it all. But while the echoes of the past offered explanations, the present was unraveling, and the Crown's financial gatekeepers were about to take drastic action. Within hours of the Queen Mother's will surfacing, the royal trustees convened a secret emergency meeting, their goal to question the validity, legality, and implications of a fortune bypassing royal protocol and to consider drastic steps to contain the fallout. The chamber was filled with tension so thick it bordered on suffocation. Behind closed doors and away from the press, the royal trustees, those appointed guardians of the monarchy's financial order, demanded immediate access to the vault inventory discovered by Anne. What had initially seemed like a sentimental visit to the Queen Mother's archive had now detonated into a constitutional conundrum. How could such a vast fortune, unreported, unaccounted for, have been hidden from the Crown's watchful eye? And more crucially, how could it have been gifted to someone who held no title, no official role, no power within the structure they had sworn to uphold? At the center of the storm stood Anne, unmoved by their accusations, unshaken in her stance. She refused to hand over the original documents. Her reasoning was simple. They were not state property. They were her mother's personal legacy, entrusted to her for a purpose, and she would not allow bureaucratic interference to smother her mother's dying wish. That defiance cracked the foundation of the room. Old loyalties were exposed. The trustees, once a cohesive unit, now stood divided between those who had served under Queen Elizabeth II and those recently appointed by Charles. The former understood the Queen Mother's propensity for secrecy, even rebellion. The latter saw only a breach of protocol, a threat to the established order, but the financial implications could not be ignored. Early estimates of the hidden estate's value were staggering, rivaling the funds allocated to royal charitable initiatives and even brushing up against the sovereign grant. If the Queen Mother's private wealth had been redirected exclusively to Zara, it meant entire fiscal strategies might need to be restructured. Whispers began to circulate, first in hushed corners, then around polished oak tables, about neutralizing the will. The term was never officially documented, but its intent was unmistakable. Challenge its authenticity, invalidate its execution, bury it under legal technicalities if necessary. The palace didn't need more scandal. What it needed was control. Meanwhile, Zara's name began to vanish. Quietly, without declaration, she was excluded from the upcoming royal finance briefings. Her seat at the table was not just unassigned, it was erased. The message was clear. She might hold the Queen Mother's affection, she might even hold her fortune, but she would not be welcomed into the machinery that governed the monarchy's inner workings. It was a silent freeze, but one that chilled to the bone. Yet, just as Zara's fate was being debated behind mahogany doors, She made a decision of her own and walked straight into the lion's den. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't a formal request. It was a personal confrontation, Zara face to face with the king. What was said behind those closed doors remains classified, but insiders suggest tears, ultimatums, and one moment that left Charles speechless. With no aide beside her, no schedule cleared in advance, and no approval from protocol officers, Zara walked into Buckingham Palace unannounced. She was calm, steady, but the weight she carried could not be measured in posture alone. The guards hesitated. The silence in the corridors thickened. She asked to speak to the king, and moments later, she was escorted to his private study. The atmosphere inside was still, almost surreal. This was not a confrontation about politics. It was about legacy, blood, and the invisible strings that tie Emily to duty. When Charles looked up and saw her standing there, not as a granddaughter, but as the unexpected heir to a fortune he didn't even know existed, he was, for the first time in years, unsure of his footing. Zara spoke first. With a voice not raised but unwavering, she told him, "I see what this is doing to everyone. But I need you to understand something. This wasn't meant to divide us. It was a gift, not a weapon." She paused, letting the words breathe in the room. Charles, visibly moved yet clearly unsettled, asked what many had whispered behind her back. "Do you intend to keep it?" Her silence in response stretched longer than it should have. She blinked, looked down, then back up, and it was that pause, that indecision, that struck him hardest, because it revealed not calculation but conflict. This wasn't ambition, it was grief wrapped in obligation. In that still moment, Zara shared something no one else had heard. She recalled a day in her youth when the Queen Mother, in a rare moment of intimacy, had turned to her and said, "You've got the winds of fire, untamed. Never forget that's both your blessing and your curse." Zara's voice cracked when she repeated it. It wasn't the money that overwhelmed her, it was the knowledge that her grandmother had seen something in her worth preserving at all costs. Zara told Charles she didn't want power, didn't want titles, didn't want any part of the vicious game now swirling around her. But, she added carefully, she also wouldn't dishonor a woman whose final act of trust was to choose her. What followed wasn't an argument. It wasn't even a resolution. It was silence, the kind that descends not from anger, but from a truth too heavy to speak. Charles neither endorsed her choice nor condemned it. He simply stared, as though trying to find in her the face of the woman who raised him, and fearing what it might mean now, the 20 at her loyalty had skipped a generation. But outside the study, a different battle was raging, and Camilla was already planning her next move. No announcements, no discussions, just a revised royal program, and Zara's name was missing. From balcony appearances to ceremonial lineups, the erasure was precise. This wasn't oversight, it was retaliation, and Camilla's fingerprints were all over it. The first hint came quietly, tucked inside an updated schedule distributed to senior aides. Royal Ascot, one of the Queen Mother's favourite events, forever tied to Zara's equestrian world, suddenly showed no place for her. Publicists scrambled with explanations, mumbling about logistics, capacity, and rotation. But everyone who mattered knew better. This was not logistics, this was a message. Camilla, having failed to halt the inheritance, was now determined to contain the woman who had become its guardian. Appearances would be controlled. Access limited, influence restrained. Behind closed doors, whispers spread that Camilla had met with protocol officers days earlier. The conversation, though never recorded, left the unmistakable impression that certain names should be reconsidered for high-profile events. Zara's was the first to fall. It didn't take long for journalists to notice the pattern. Headlines didn't accuse, but they hinted. Subtle phrases like unexpected absence, unusual omission, and quiet reshuffle began circulating. The public sensed something was wrong, something colder, something calculated. Anne, when she saw the revised program, felt a fury she rarely allowed to surface. She demanded clarity. She requested explanations. Instead, she received a carefully crafted memo so polished it was almost insulting. It spoke of protocol adjustments, balancing commitments, and maintaining harmony within the institution. Not once did it mention Zara by name. That omission said more than any sentence ever could. The message was clear. This battle would not be fought openly. It would be fought through absence, exclusion, and silence. And Zara chose silence, at least publicly. She said nothing to reporters. She refused to feed speculation, but privately, she confided in Mike. She told him she felt like she was being erased not for what she had done, but for what had been placed in her hands. He urged her to stay steady, reminding her that power does not always scream. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it survives. Still, the pain lingered. She had never wanted the spotlight, but being deliberately erased felt like punishment for simply existing. Inside the palace, unease spread like smoke. Staff members accustomed to navigating egos and crises now whispered among themselves. It's like watching a quiet civil war. One of them murmured. Nobody knew which side to stand on. Nobody knew how far Camilla would go, and nobody could predict whether the monarchy itself might fracture under the weight of a secret fortune and an unspoken rivalry. But not everyone agreed with the erasure, because one unexpected royal figure was about to take Zara's side and expose Camilla's next misstep. In a move no one saw coming, Princess Alexandra, a stalwart of old-world royalty, broke decades of silence. Her statement, a direct endorsement of Zara Tindall and a subtle but chilling rebuke of current royal leadership. The letter wasn't intended for public eyes. Written in Alexandra's famously meticulous hand, it was addressed privately to a long-retired aide and former family friend. But somehow, some say by design, others say by loyalty, it made its way into the editorial inbox of the Times. Published with minimal fanfare but maximum impact, the letter stunned the palace. Alexandra, known for her discretion, had chosen this moment, this battle, to make her voice heard. And it landed like a thunderclap. She praised the Queen Mother's final act of clarity, calling it one of the most profound demonstrations of generational trust I have ever witnessed. She spoke of Zara not as a modern outlier, but as a true bearer of her grandmother's grace not defined by diamonds, but by dignity. What made the letter more than just supportive was its unmistakable tone of remembrance laced with warning. Alexandra recalled evenings when Zara, still a child, would sit beside the Queen Mother during family gatherings often ignored by the press, often overlooked by the protocol, but never forgotten by the matriarch, who observed everything. It was clear, Alexandra wrote, that the Queen Mother did not see Zara as an outsider. She saw her as a mirror of something Britain was quietly losing, the rawness of nobility, without pretense. There was no need to name names. The subtext was razor sharp. Alexandra's praise for Zara doubled as a quiet, damning critique of how the institution had responded to her rise and how it had chosen, deliberately, to shrink her from view. The fallout was immediate. Charles and Camilla were blindsided. The Queen Consort's strategy of silent exclusion had worked until now, because while Alexandra had long been dismissed as a relic of a fading generation, her influence among aristocrats and old guard royals remained potent. She didn't chase cameras, she didn't trade in scandal, and that gave her words more weight than any press release or televised address. Within days, Zara began receiving letters, quiet messages of solidarity from lesser royals, titled patrons, and country elites who had grown disillusioned by the tightening grip of modern palace politics. It was not a revolution, not yet, but it was a flicker, a signal that the tide was shifting, not just towards Zara, but away from something else entirely. And as Alexandra ignited hope, a final twist was yet to come, sealed in a box Anne had not yet dared to open. At the bottom of the coffer, beneath gold bonds and private letters, lay a silk-wrapped box. Anne had ignored it until now. Inside, a forgotten heirloom gleamed, a custom diadem once crafted for the Queen Mother's private moments, and now entrusted to Zara, but its meaning went far beyond wealth. The box was small, but carried the weight of centuries. Anne had passed it over in the chaos of discovery, unsure if opening it would unearth comfort or complication. But in the wake of Alexandra's defiant letter and the rising murmur of public support, Anne knew the time had come. She unwrapped the silk slowly, almost reverently. There it was, a delicate, emerald-encrusted diadem, untouched by time, its design unmistakably personal. This wasn't the kind worn for pageantry or protocol. This was crafted for the Queen Mother alone, worn only in moments far from flashing cameras, at private gatherings where legacy was whispered rather than displayed. The last known sighting had been in 1945. Since then, it had vanished until now. Tucked beneath the velvet lining was a final handwritten note, yellowed but pristine. It read, "For the woman who leads not by crown, but by courage." Anne's eyes stung as she read it aloud. She said nothing at first, only held the diadem as if it might dissolve in her hands. Then came the words that had been building silently for weeks. "She always knew," Anne whispered, voice trembling, not with anger, but with awe. The Queen Mother had foreseen this future, not just the inheritance, but the resistance. She had known that Zara would never seek power, and for that very reason, she had deemed her worthy of something greater, trust. For Zara, the moment was overwhelming. This was never about money. It was never about property or protocol. This was a legacy carved in silence, passed hand to hand by women who understood what the monarchy often refused to acknowledge, that influence is not always loud, and leadership doesn't always wear a title. She hesitated for days before doing what no one expected. At a small charity gala one, she had already been scheduled to attend. Zara arrived wearing the diadem, against all convention, against all advice. She made no statement. She gave no interviews, but the image said everything. The photos went viral in hours. Speculation surged. Commentators called it everything from a quiet rebellion to an unspoken coronation. But the public response was what mattered most: overwhelming admiration, and a rare moment of collective clarity. In Zara, many saw a new kind of royalty, one shaped not by decree, but by dignity. And just like that, the conversation shifted. She wasn't just the Queen Mother's granddaughter, she was her chosen echo, living proof that strength could reside outside the throne and still change everything around it. As the dust settles and whispers fade, one truth remains. The Queen Mother's final fortune wasn't measured in pounds, but in the unshakable faith she placed in the granddaughter who never sought a throne, but may have just inherited the soul of the monarchy. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.